Hey, ladies, and welcome to our very first Women of the Bible quarantine blog Bible study. This is something that I had planned to write. I had intended that this was just going to be a blog that I was going to write as we kind of look at some different women throughout the Bible and the ways that they responded to unforeseen difficulties. But as I started to write this one, it was so long, and I really felt like it was hard for me to really communicate just my heart on the topic. And so I decided that I was going to give this a try, the video blog. And so here we are. We're going to jump into this this week, and I decided that the best place I could think of to kick off this looking at women of the Bible and times of adversity is to go back to the book of Ruth and look at the story of Ruth and Naomi. It's a wonderful story. It's full of some great insights about two women who handled some unforeseen adversity in two very different ways. Now, a couple of notes on this. If you are in our ladies' Bible study at my church, which I'm sure most people watching this are, you've heard me teach on this before. And I'm going to encourage you, even though you've heard me teach on this before, just hang with me as we walk through this, because we know that the Bible is living and active, and as our circumstances change, which they certainly have changed in the last couple of weeks, as our circumstances change, the Bible speaks to us faithfully in different ways. And so just hang with me, even if you've heard me teach on this before. The second note I'm going to give you is to please, after you watch this, please go and read the book of Ruth. It's 4 chapters. It's a very quick read. It reads like a novel, and it's a great story to just go and read it, and things will really carry more weight and more impact when you read the story for yourself directly from God's word, as opposed to hearing my very brief synopsis that I'm going to give as part of our study. So let me set the scene a little bit with Ruth and Naomi. We have this family that is from Bethlehem, okay, an Israelite family. It's Elimelech and his wife Naomi. They have 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, is how I'm going to pronounce that. I don't guarantee that that's right, but that's how we're going to go with it for now. They leave their homeland because of a famine, and they end up settling in the land of Moab. And when they get there and get settled after a period of time, Elimelech dies. And so his 2 sons end up taking wives. They are Moabite women from the country in which they have decided to reside. Their names are Ruth and Orpah. And they marry these women, and then the sons die. Naomi's sons die also. And so we're left with this trio of women, this trio of widowed women, Naomi and her 2 daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah. Now, Naomi is in a land that is not her own. This is not her home. And so after her husband and her 2 sons die, she has no one to provide for her. The most logical thing for her to do is to go home, is to go back to Bethlehem. And so that's what makes the most sense for her, that she could go home and maybe rely on the kindness of some extended family or some friends to help her have her needs provided for. But Ruth and Orpah, this is their home, Moab, where they're at. And so as Naomi suggests to them, the thing that makes the most sense for them is to go back to their parents. Naomi feels that at this time she has nothing to offer to Ruth and to Orpah. Her sons have died. She has no more sons. And so the best thing for them to do is to go back to their parents until a time where they can have a new husband and kind of start over, start anew with a new husband and begin their families then. And so she tells the daughters-in-law, she tells them to just go home, go back to their parents. And Orpah does do that. She tells Naomi goodbye, and she goes back to be with her parents. But Ruth, on the other hand, it just is not going to do it. She just tells Naomi that she wants to go with her, she wants to be with her, and though Naomi tries to persuade her otherwise, Ruth is just not going to be denied. And so Naomi finally agrees to let Ruth travel with her back to Bethlehem. And so the pair of them they go back to Bethlehem, and they get there, and they have to have a way to provide for themselves because they have no men in their life to provide for them. So Ruth has to come up with a way to provide for Naomi, is what it comes down to. And so she ends up going gleaning in the barley fields, which essentially means that she is going to go along behind. Sorry, I have a low battery. Go along behind the workers, and she's going to pick up the things that are left over. then also the more generous landowners would leave some barley around the edges of the field for people in these sort of circumstances to come along and have some provisions for themselves. So Ruth goes out and she does this. She ends up getting noticed by a landowner named Boaz, who notices her work ethic, first of all, and he's heard her story, and he appreciates how she has cared for Naomi and taken care of her. And it just turns out, as it often does when God is in charge of things, that Boaz is the family redeemer, the kinsman redeemer for Naomi's family, which means he's eligible to marry Ruth and to redeem Naomi and Ruth and provide for them. And after some hoop jumping, this is what occurs. He is able to marry Ruth, redeem the family, and this story becomes a beautiful picture of Christ's redemption of mankind, of humanity. So that's the full story, the whole story of Ruth and Naomi in a very tight nutshell. But we're not going to focus on the whole story. We're going to focus on just the first couple of chapters, when we really get an opportunity to look at Ruth and Naomi and the way that they responded very differently to some very adverse and unforeseen circumstances. Now, before I get into this too much with Naomi, I want to say that what happened to Naomi was absolutely terrible. To lose her husband and then both of her sons, that is just unimaginable heartache. So as I look at her reaction, I don't want it to feel like I'm selling her heartache short. This is just absolutely devastating for her, and I think we can all see that and all understand that. So please don't think that I'm just selling short her tragedy, okay, or her heartache. I understand that this was a big deal and very difficult times that she was walking through. But Naomi's response is so similar to how many of us respond when we're in these very difficult days and walking through some very hard valleys. And it's a response that really will oftentimes leave us feeling very alone. And the first part of Naomi's response is what brings her to that feeling of being alone. And it's the very first thing she wants to do is she wants to isolate, both physically and emotionally. She tells her daughters-in-law, her only immediate family that remains, she tells them to just go home. And yes, she did think that was what was best for her. But also I feel like sometimes when we're in a situation where we're in deep sorrow or a difficult circumstance, we feel like nobody else gets it. We feel like, well, nobody else can really understand. And so in our hearts, we feel alone. In our hearts, we feel isolated. And so we kind of start to seek out a physical existence that reflects the isolation that we feel in our heart. And we kind of start to push people away. You know, you'll cancel dinner reservations, or you won't pick up the phone when it rings, or probably more accurately, you won't answer your text messages as they come in, or you know, heaven forbid, if somebody leaves you a voicemail, you're not gonna listen to that. You're not gonna return that phone call. But we start to kind of pull away because we're hurting and we're confused and we feel like nobody else really understands. And so we're seeking out kind of a physical and emotional isolation that reflects the isolation that we're feeling in our hearts. And most of the time, unfortunately, it works. If you push people away and kind of reject their caring a couple of times, eventually their own pride kind of kicks in, and they will probably start to hesitate to offer it. And eventually you'll find yourself in the place that you wanted to be, isolated. And most of the time you decide that you are just really lonely, and it's not all it's cracked up to be. So as things are crazy right now, maybe you're in a place where you feel just really overwhelmed. Maybe you're burdened with great sorrow. Maybe you're just kind of paralyzed by not knowing what comes next and what to do, what your course of action should be. Can I encourage you to not isolate emotionally? Yes, please stay home. Isolate yourself physically. Stay home, wash your hands, do all those things that you're supposed to do. But don't emotionally isolate, and definitely don't spiritually isolate. We don't want this to be a time where we pull away from God and we're letting ourselves become spiritually isolated. Isolation is just going to make you feel lonely, and it's not the best way to handle your adversity. It's not the best way to handle these unforeseen difficulties. The second thing that happens with Naomi is that Naomi becomes really bitter. And you know, she has this progression that is not unique to her. I feel like it's really universal, and it's something that's really easy for us to get caught up in. And it's that she's in sorrow, which transforms into anger, which transforms into bitterness. That's a really common progression. And you know what? Naomi actually gets to the point where when she gets to Bethlehem, she tells people to quit calling her Naomi, which means pleasant, and to start calling her Mara, which means bitter. And you know, I think a lot of us can really fall into that. Sometimes your sorrow will morph into anger because you don't understand. And like Naomi says in this, she says the reason she's bitter is because she feels like the hand of God has gone out against her. She feels like in the middle of her most desperate circumstance that God has turned his back on her. And so she's bitter. Her sorrow has turned into anger, and that anger has taken root in her heart, and it has become bitterness, and she has become a bitter woman. And can I be the person to tell you that bitterness is a really scary thing? Okay, bitterness leads to a hard heart, and a hard heart is a heart that puts up walls, and it puts up barriers between you and God. And it makes it so it's hard to hear his voice, and it's hard to recognize and see his hand and his move in your life and in the lives of people around you and in the circumstances around you. Bitterness walls off your heart, and that is a dangerous place to be. And it starts to turn you into somebody that you didn't expect, and into somebody that you're probably not real fond of. Bitterness will just change you if it gets to a root in your heart and it takes hold of you. And we don't want to be women, especially in times like these when things are so uncertain and crazy. We don't want to be women who are walled off from God and from hearing his word and seeing his direction. We want clear communication. And so in a time where so many women, especially me, I understand this, so many women are scrambling for something right now that they can control because the world seems so very out of control. And can I encourage you that in this time, when you have time for the first time in however long, if you are struggling with some deep-seated anger that you just cannot let go of, let's use this time to take control of that, not in your own strength. That won't work. But use this as a time where you draw close to God and you and God work on that together. You pray that God brings you to a place of forgiveness and a place where you can let go of your anger. You have to be willing to not be angry anymore. You have to be willing to let that go. You have to be willing to let God root that out of your heart. And I'll tell you what, it's going to be so much better when you break down that wall of bitterness and you take care of that anger that's deep-seated down into your heart. So that's Naomi's reaction, okay? She tried to isolate, she became bitter, and that's not what we want to have a part of. Ruth was also experiencing great heartache, great unforeseen adversity, great unforeseen difficulty, but she handled it in a very different way. She faced it with a very different attitude, and it was because she made a choice. And she made a choice to choose radical love and sacrificial service. And those are the two things that always jump out to me so strongly when I'm looking at Ruth. Radical love and sacrificial service. Naomi tries to send her back to her parents, and it makes the most sense for Ruth. It would make the most sense for her to go back to her parents, wait until she can take another husband and have a family. But she decides to choose radical love for Naomi, for her mother-in-law. And she makes this beautiful declaration of, where you go, I'll go. Where you stay, I'll stay. And she's saying to Naomi, in the middle of this difficulty, in the middle of this heartache, I am with you. I am on your side. I'm in your corner. I've got your back no matter what. Radical love that she is showing to Naomi in the midst of this difficulty. And isn't that something that we would all love to have in the middle of our sorrow or our difficult circumstances, for somebody to come alongside of us and say, hey, no matter what, I've got your back. I'm in your corner. I am for you. Man, wouldn't that feel good? And if it's something that we would desire for ourselves, it's something that we need to be willing to give and do for others. We have others right now who are walking through great sorrow in the middle of all the uncertainty that the rest of us are dealing with. We all know people who this is hitting a little bit harder than others, and there's a struggle. And so we need to be willing to choose radical love at a time like this, where we can come alongside and say, no matter what, I'm in your corner. And with radical love will always come sacrificial service. Ruth chose to serve Naomi sacrificially. She went out into the fields, and this was dangerous. Ruth was a foreigner in a strange land. She had no man to protect her. It was dangerous. It was a sacrifice, and at the least, it would cost her her time and her physical labor, and at the most, it could cost her her health or her life. This was dangerous to go out without the protection of a man over you into this area, especially for a foreigner. But it was something that Ruth was willing to do. She was willing, because of her great love for Naomi, she was willing to sacrificially serve her, even if it cost her something. Now, this time that we're in, this crazy time, has taken a lot of things from us. But one thing that it's going to give us is opportunities to serve. And we're going to see those come to us in unexpected ways, but I can guarantee that they are all going to require sacrifice. You may have to sacrifice some toilet paper or something, a supply that somebody needs. You might need to sacrifice some money because you've got a friend or someone you care about that's not able to work during this time. There are lots of opportunities to serve that are going to arise, but they are going to require sacrifice. And we have to remember that sacrificial service is going to accompany that radical love, and that is the choice that we need to make in these days, because our world is in desperate need of both of those things. Look, guys, this is a crazy time. We're all in a time of uncertainty. We don't really understand what's going on. We don't know what's going to happen. Things are changing so fast. You just don't know what the next day is going to hold. But we do know that the one thing that we can control is the attitude with which we face our unexpected difficulties and our unexpected adversity. So let's just skip anger and bitterness. Let's not go there. Let's choose radical love and sacrificial service to see us through these very confusing and unexpected days. I hope that you'll continue to join me as we look at different women of the Bible and how they handled their adversities and their difficult times. I'm not going to put forward a schedule. I'm not going to pretend like I can stick to a schedule at this point. Like many of you, I'm unexpectedly homeschooling my daughter and trying to figure out, life in the way that we're doing things now. But I hope you'll stay tuned to my blog page and my bloggers Facebook page as we continue to, as God allows, to look at some different women in the Bible. Thanks for joining me, guys. Until next time.